Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
All right, so get ready, because today we're going deep into a really dark part of Colombian history.
Yeah.
We're talking about the false positive scandal, extrajudicial killings that were happening between 2002 and 2007.
Right.
And what's crazy is this is a time when the guerrilla groups were actually already kind of weakening, you would think, with the conflict. You know, winding down, things would be getting safer.
Exactly.
But that's not at all what happened. Instead, we saw this surge in killings.
Yeah.
It's a story about how pressure incentives and, I guess, wartime morality can all come together to create a really, really dangerous situation.
Yeah, and the recent indictment of 39 Army officials by Colombia's Special War Crimes Tribunal,
Oh, wow.
the JEP, including 4 generals,
4 generals.
really brings this whole issue to the forefront.
It's a huge deal, right? Like,
huge.
having generals involved suggests that this wasn't just like a few bad apples acting on their own.
No, not at all.
This was something that was, you know, potentially much bigger.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So before we get into the specifics of this case,
Sure.
can you maybe give us a little background on the JEP itself?
Of course.
For those of us who aren't as familiar with, you know, the Colombian conflicts,
Right.
what is this tribunal all about?
Well, the JEP, which stands for Jurisdiction Especial para la Paz,
Okay.
was actually created as part of the peace agreement that was signed between the Colombian government and the FARC guerrillas back in 2016.
Okay.
And what makes it really unique is its focus on restorative justice.
Okay.
So instead of just, you know, punishing perpetrators.
Punishing people.
Exactly. The JEP aims to actually uncover the truth about what happened,
Wow.
to offer reparations to victims, and then help reintegrate former combatants back into society.
So it's kind of like a holistic
It is a very holistic
approach.
It's a long and complex process.
Right.
But the idea is that you can only really achieve true peace by addressing like the root causes of the conflict and promoting reconciliation.
It makes sense. Yeah.
Especially in a country that's been, you know, torn apart by decades of war.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, you know, throwing people in jail.
Yeah.
It's about trying to heal the wounds of the past
Right.
and prevent, you know, future violence from happening.
Exactly. And the false positive scandal is a prime example of why this kind of approach is so important.
Absolutely. Let's talk about what actually happened.
Oh.
The JP's calling this a body count policy.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds pretty straightforward,
Yeah.
but can you kind of explain how it actually worked?
Yeah, essentially, the Colombian military was under immense pressure to show success in the fight against these guerrillas.
Okay.
So they implemented this system where soldiers were rewarded for killing enemies.
Oh, wow.
So the more kills they had, the better their chances were for a promotion,
Really?
getting time off, receiving other benefits.
So it was literally a case of like incentivizing violence.
It was.
No wonder things got so out of hand.
Exactly. And the problem is that this created a perverse incentive structure where soldiers were motivated to produce results, even if it meant fabricating them.
And the JEP investigation actually found that that's exactly what happened, right?
Exactly.
They weren't just targeting actual guerrillas.
Right.
They were going after innocent civilians.
Yes.
And like making it look like they were enemy combatants.
Precisely. And they used various methods to carry out these killings,
Oh, wow.
all designed to create the appearance of legitimate combat engagements.
Oh, wow.
For example, some victims were lured with false promises of jobs,
Oh, my God.
only to be executed and dressed up as guerrillas.
It's horrifying to think about people being like tricked and killed like that.
Yeah.
Were there other ways that they were carrying out these killings?
Yeah, they also targeted vulnerable people,
Oh, gosh.
like homeless people or drug addicts.
People who wouldn't be missed as much.
Yeah, people who are less likely to be missed and who wouldn't raise a lot of suspicion.
Right.
They would plant weapons on them and claim they were killed in a firefight.
It's sickening to think that these soldiers were exploiting like the most vulnerable members of society
Right.
just to boost their kill counts.
It's awful.
Did the JEP uncover how widespread this was?
They identified over 6,402 victims of false positives killings.
Wow.
Between 2002 and 2008.
That's a crazy number.
It's a staggering number that really highlights the scale of this atrocity.
Over 6,000 people.
Yeah, it's hard to even wrap your head around that.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that, each one of those victims was a person.
Absolutely.
With a family, with hopes and dreams.
Right.
The impact on their loved ones is immeasurable.
Of course.
And you mentioned earlier that the guerrillas were already kind of weakening during this period.
They were.
So these killings weren't happening in the heat of, some major battle.
No.
It makes you wonder why the military felt the need to resort to these, extreme measures.
That's the key question, and it gets to the heart of the issue.
Yeah.
The JEP's findings suggest that the false positive scandal was driven by a few things.
Okay.
Including pressure from the government to show results.
Of course.
In the fight against the guerrillas.
They wanted to be seen as doing something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Also, a culture of impunity within the military.
So basically, they thought they could get away with it.
Yeah, pretty much. And also the perverse incentive system that we talked about.
Right, where they're rewarded for killing.
Exactly.
So it wasn't just about, taking out the enemy. It was about creating this illusion of success.
It was.
Even if it meant sacrificing innocent lives.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It was a way of showing the public and the international community that the military was winning the war.
Even when they weren't.
Even as the conflict was winding down.
But this whole thing raises some really disturbing questions about the nature of power.
It does.
And control during wartime.
Yeah.
If soldiers are willing to kill innocent people.
Right.
Just to advance their careers or please their superiors.
Yeah.
What does that say about the military's command structure?
That's a crucial point. It suggests that there was a breakdown in accountability.
Yeah.
Both within the military itself and in the government's oversight of the armed forces.
So a failure at multiple levels.
Yeah. And it really highlights the danger of creating a system where soldiers are incentivized to kill.
Right.
Without any proper oversight or ethical guidelines.
Because once you create that kind of environment, it's hard to control the consequences.
Exactly.
But what about the government? Did they know about these killings?
Well, that's something that the JEP is still investigating.
Okay.
There's evidence to suggest that some high-ranking officials were aware of what was happening.
So they knew.
But the extent of their knowledge and involvement is still unclear.
Okay.
The JEP's work is really crucial.
Yeah.
Because by uncovering the truth about what happened...
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
They're helping to hold those responsible accountable.
Hopefully.
And hopefully prevent these kinds of atrocities from happening again.
Yeah, I guess that's the hope, right?
Yeah.
That by shining a light on these dark chapters, we can learn from the past and create a more just and peaceful future.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process.
For sure.
The JEP's work is a step in the right direction, but it's only one part of a much larger effort to address the legacy of violence and promote reconciliation in Colombia.
But even with all of the evidence and testimonies, some people still deny that these false positive killings ever even happened.
It's true.
How do you even begin to have a conversation about reconciliation when there's such a disagreement about the truth?
That's one of the biggest challenges facing Colombia today.
Yeah.
Denial and historical revisionism are powerful forces that can prevent real healing and reconciliation.
So how do you overcome that?
Well, it requires a multifaceted approach.
Okay.
It involves education, truth-telling, memorialization, and accountability.
So it's really about, creating spaces where victims' voices can be heard, acknowledged, and where perpetrators are held responsible for their actions.
Yes. And the JEP's work is a big part of that.
Right.
By bringing perpetrators and victims together.
Wow.
In a restorative justice process.
Okay.
The JEP is creating opportunities for dialogue, understanding, and forgiveness.
It seems like a long and difficult process.
It is a long and difficult process.
Yeah.
But it's essential for rebuilding trust.
Yeah.
And creating a shared sense of history.
It sounds like Colombia is facing a monumental task.
It is.
In trying to heal from these wounds of the past.
It is a monumental task, but it's also an opportunity.
Okay.
By confronting its past and embracing restorative justice, Colombia has the potential to become a model for other countries grappling with similar challenges.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So what does this case say about achieving peace and justice after a long and brutal conflict?
It shows us that peace isn't simply the absence of war, but a process of healing, reconciliation, and accountability. It's a process that requires truth-telling, empathy, and a willingness to acknowledge the pain of the past.
Yeah.
And it's a process that takes time, patience, and a commitment from all sides.
It's definitely a complex and challenging process, but it does sound like Colombia is taking some important steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into this really dark chapter, it's clear that the false positives scandal raises some really profound questions about the nature of war, justice, accountability.
For sure.
What stood out to you as particularly significant about this case?
I think what really struck me was just the sheer scale of the deception.
Yeah.
And the betrayal of trust.
Right.
I mean, these were soldiers, people who were sworn to protect their country, who were systematically killing innocent civilians and then covering it up.
Yeah.
It makes you really question the very foundations of authority and just the corrosive effects of war on morality.
Yeah, it's like that saying, all is fair in love and war.
Right.
But this takes it to a whole new level.
It does.
And it wasn't just a few rogue individuals. This was happening on a massive scale.
Yes.
Involving high-ranking officers.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder about the psychological impact on the soldiers who actually carried out these killings. How do you even live with yourself after doing something like that?
That's a question that psychologists and researchers are still trying to understand.
Yeah.
There's a growing body of work on the concept of moral injury.
Moral injury.
Yeah, which refers to the psychological harm that can result from either perpetrating, witnessing, or failing to prevent acts that violate your own moral code.
It's kind of like you're betraying your own sense of right and wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's actually different from PTSD.
Oh, okay.
Which is triggered by, fear and threat.
Right.
Moral injury is rooted in shame, guilt, and a sense of betrayal.
So these soldiers are not only dealing with, the trauma of combat, but they're also carrying the burden of having committed these acts that they know are wrong.
Exactly.
That's got to be incredibly heavy to bear.
It's devastating.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, many veterans who suffer from moral injury struggle in silence.
Right.
Because they feel isolated and ashamed of what they've done.
It's tragic that the very people who are supposed to be protecting us often end up being the ones who need protection themselves.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that the true cost of war extends far beyond the battlefield.
Absolutely. The wounds of war can run very deep, both for individuals and for society as a whole.
For sure. And the false positive scandal in Colombia is just a stark reminder of that.
It is.
Well, this has been a truly eye-opening deep dive.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the specifics of the case to the broader implications for peace, justice, the psychological impact of war.
Right.
For our listeners who want to learn more, are there any resources that you would recommend?
Definitely. The JEP's website has a ton of information on their investigations, including testimonies from victims and perpetrators.
Wow.
There's also a few excellent books and documentaries out there on the Colombian conflict that provide really valuable context and insights.
We'll be sure to include links to those in the show notes.
Right.
And as we leave you to ponder the complexities of this case, we really just encourage you to consider the ongoing struggle for peace and justice.
Yes.
Not just in Colombia, but around the world.
Everywhere.
What lessons can we learn from this tragedy?
Right.
How can we hold those in power accountable for their actions? And how can we create a world where these kinds of atrocities never happen again?
Those are the questions we all need to be asking ourselves.
Yeah.
And while there aren't any easy answers,
right,
I think by engaging in these difficult conversations, by listening to the voices of victims, and by demanding accountability from our leaders, we can start to move towards a more just and peaceful future.
Well said. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning,
and keep learning,
and keep seeking the truth.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.